For such a mild-mannered man, the language was notably undiplomatic. After an aid convoy was bombed outside Aleppo, the UN Secretary-General said enough was enough.
Just when we think it cannot get any worse, the bar of depravity sinks lower.
But words are one thing. Is there any sign of any action tonight that might actually make a difference? Also on News at 10. He hasn't even won yet, but Jeremy Corbyn's MPs are already trying to wrestle power back away from the members. Dying to get here, the boy in Calais who was entitled to come to the UK but couldn't bear to wait any longer for the red tape to be cleared. And let's get the party started, that trip back from the Paralympics in full.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. If international outrage could have brought peace to Syria, it no doubt would have done 5 years ago. But last night's attack on a convoy of aid lorries has prompted the kind of language you don't normally hear from the United Nations. Its Secretary-General talked of the bar of depravity moving yet lower, accused the Syrian government of the murder of innocents during the conflict, and condemned its supporters, Russia and Iran, for having blood on their hands. We'll have that reaction from the UN in a moment. But first, the attack itself. Moscow insisted neither Russia nor Syrian forces were responsible. Indeed, its defence ministry said the convoy might just have caught fire. Yes, indeed it might. But back in the real world, the Americans are squarely blaming the Russians.
In a war where violations of humanitarian law have become the norm, this attack on a vital aid convoy for hungry and exhausted civilians on the outskirts of Aleppo is a new low. This eyewitness from the civilian rescue teams known as the White Helmets described the scene.
More than 20 vehicles, 20 trucks full of food and flour and medicine and bombers and blankets.
The aid worker holds up the remains of nappies meant for babies in the midst of Syria's war. His name is Amir. Immediately as the bombing began, he notified the Red Crescent that their warehouse and the convoy had been hit. They in turn told the Syrian government, but he claims their planes carried on bombing. He told me he thinks it was intentional.
The regime still sent aircraft to shield this place. 8 of targeting this place, 8 hours. After 8 barrel bombs, 2 cluster bombs, and the aircraft shelled this place with bullets.
But Russia, whose air force supports the Assad regime, has released this footage from one of its drones. Purporting to show the aid trucks lined up, it highlights what it claims is a vehicle with militants and a mortar accompanying the convoy. But this vehicle could also have been passing by the parked trucks. However, the UN has now changed its language, saying it can no longer verify it was an airstrike, instead describing it as an attack. This change of language is significant because the only forces who could have carried out an airstrike are Russia and Syrian government forces. The attacks took place in the opposition-held town of Umm al-Kubra in rural western Aleppo. An aid convoy of 31 trucks arrived at the Syrian Arab Red Crescent warehouse just before midday local time to deliver supplies for 78,000 people in the area. At 6 p.m, the Syrian military announced that the 7-day ceasefire was over, and just an hour later, the convoy came under attack. 18 trucks and the warehouse were destroyed. The aid was meant for the western part of Aleppo. The situation in the rebel-held eastern part of the city, which has been cut off and besieged for months, is even worse. I spoke with a local professor who's been updating us from the city.
These people don't find anything to eat. Yesterday, exactly 5 people were poisoned by eating outdated food. When the doctors said, "Oh my God, don't you know that these foods were outdated?" They said, "What should we do? We don't have anything to eat."
A little over a week ago, Aleppo's children were enjoying the all-too-brief moment of calm the ceasefire brought. Now they're once again subjected to a conflict in which all sides seem not to care who is wounded or killed. Raghi Omar, News at 10.
Well, despite everything that has happened in Syria in the past 24 hours, world leaders at the UN agreed it was still worth trying to keep the ceasefire plan on track, but ringing in their ears that condemnation of Syria from the Secretary-General. It has its uses, of course, but in the history of the last few decades, it is perhaps the frequent, frustrating impotence of the UN that is the organisation's most notable feature. That said, leaders still come here, they meet, they talk, and just occasionally someone says something that does strike home. The UN Secretary-General normally comes across as rather a mild-mannered man. Not today. After the attack on the aid convoy, he had clearly had enough.
Just when we think it cannot get any worse, the bar of depravity sinks lower.
With Russia principally in his sights, he accused outside powers of fueling the suffering.
Powerful patrons that keep feeding the war machine also have blood on their hands. Present in this hall today are representatives of governments that have ignored, facilitated, funded, participated in, or even planned and carried out atrocities inflicted by all sides.
The men who delivered the aid were heroes, he said. Those who killed them, cowards. And there was little doubt to whom his anger was principally directed in this hall.
Many groups have killed many innocents, but none more so than the government of Syria, which continues to barrel bomb neighborhoods and systematically torture thousands of detainees.
It remains to be seen whether his words have any impact at all. For the moment, the blame game goes on, along with the bombing. And Raghi is here to try and assess where this is going, if anywhere. We heard from the UN leaders there. They want the ceasefire to continue, but there only was a ceasefire because of the Americans and the Russians, agreeing it.
That's right.
There are odds today about this attack. What do you make of that and the prospects of anything going forward?
More than odds, actually. I mean, the Americans in the last hour have said that this isn't a formal statement, but this is coming out of Washington officials saying that they believe that 2 Russian jets actually bombed the aid convoy. There's no hint of this. It's a bold statement. I mean, and again, according to sources, it just reinforces the extent to which Russia and America are at pole opposites. Don't forget, at the weekend, Russia came out bluntly and Syria accused the Americans of having bombed Syrian government targets, killing dozens of soldiers. I think it just plays into the idea and the facts on the ground that Russia and the United States are the only 2 candidates that can foster any sense of a cessation of hostilities. And if they are so far apart and blaming each other for the deaths of people on either side, the chances of a ceasefire just gets wider and wider.
OK, Raghi, thank you very much indeed. Now, at long last, some might say, the campaign for the Labour leadership is coming to a close. There doesn't seem much doubt Jeremy Corbyn is going to beat Owen Smith. So today's meeting of its ruling committee, the National Executive, wasn't so much about the leadership race itself, but about what happens when it's all over. And it may not surprise you to learn that this is turning into another fight. Mr Corbyn's deputy, Tom Watson, wants more power returned to MPs. Mr Corbyn, hero of many of the card-carrying members, of course, likes things just the way they are. Tonight, when the meeting ended, they were as far apart as ever.
Good result, Mr Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn left the meeting of his party's ruling executive, having, it seems, once more carried the day. Although he didn't have much to say about it. His deputy, Tom Watson, whose proposals were not carried this evening, had to put a brave face on it.
I'm very pleased. We had a very positive meeting. We have talks arranged to try and bring the PLP back together, reporting back to our National Executive Committee on Saturday. We agreed 22 changes to our order of guidance, all sorts of positive things.
Mr Watson had proposed changes to the way the shadow cabinet is picked. Currently, it's chosen by the leader. One proposal was to return to the system where most shadow ministers are elected by MPs. Another is a hybrid, where MPs, the leader and party members all have a say. But even on that, the less contentious of the proposals brought here by Tom Watson, Labour's executive could only agree that Mr Corbyn should have further meetings with his MPs. And it feels as though he's managed to kick reforms he doesn't like off down the road. In fact, Labour sources say Tom Watson's more controversial proposal to limit the power of party members in leadership elections wasn't even discussed. And with just hours to go before voting closes, Jeremy Corbyn headed straight to a phone bank where those party members are being asked to vote for him.
I've just come from a short meeting of the National Executive. It got underway about midday and it finally ground to a halt at 8:30. And the interesting news was that the total Labour Party membership as of today is 551,000.
That explosion in party membership has been a remarkable feat, and by the end of the week, Mr Corbyn may have achieved another, surviving a coup by most of his parliamentary party. But the division between MPs on one side and its leader and members on the other is a problem the Labour Party still cannot find a way out of. Carl Dinnan, News at 10, Westminster.
And our political editor, Robert Peston, of course, is here to assess this. Robert, it doesn't feel like today was a terribly good day for Jeremy Corbyn. What's your assessment of it?
Well, it was one of his best days, but I wouldn't say it was a great day for the Labour Party in the round. 8 hours of argy-bargy, and they agreed one thing of any importance, which is there'll be a couple of new seats on the National Executive Committee. That's the ruling body for Labour. One will go to a member of the Scottish Parliament, another one will go to a member of the Welsh Assembly. That's not what Jeremy Corbyn wanted, because he thinks all power should now go to the activists. They won't be choosing these members. But apart from that, the other really contentious issues were, should there be a new way of electing the leader? Well, after a bit of argy-bargy, they threw that idea out completely. And then there is the issue of who chooses Labour's front bench team, on which they agreed nothing substantive, just that talks would go on. Yes, you just heard Tom Watson say there'll be a report about all of this to the NEC on Saturday night after the announcement, when we think Jeremy Corbyn will be reappointed as leader. But that's not a hard deadline. This could go absolutely nowhere.
This is a bit of a sidebar, but we've heard today that Tony Blair says he's winding down his business interests. What did you make of that?
Tony Blair announces publicly he's made enough money. I never thought, I suppose either of us thought we'd ever hear.
It's interesting to say that,
hear that. I mean, what it's all about is he has finally got totally fed up with the relentless negative media about how he is allegedly exploiting his contacts and the pro bono work he does in the Middle East and Africa to personally enrich himself. So he has said publicly that something like 10 million of the reserves, the assets of his business, will now go into his good works, and that he will limit the amount of commercial work he does to a day a week, although I will bet you any amount of money, Tom, that what he makes in that day a week is a multiple of even the excessive amounts that you and I get paid.
Let's not go there. All right, thank you very much for introducing that. Robert, see you very soon. Thank you. Now, while Labour's divisions rumble on, the Prime Minister was making the most of her moment on the world stage. In her first speech to the United Nations General Assembly, she used it to announce her first military deployment. Our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Shipp, is at the UN. Chris, maybe easiest to just talk us through essentially what she said today.
Well, Tom, when Theresa May finally did step onto the world stage, she was nearly 3 hours late. That's a consequence of having to wait for all the other world leaders before her to say what they wanted to say. When she got there and she addressed the General Assembly here, she did mention the Brexit word. She said that when Britons voted for leaving the EU, they did not vote to turn inwards or walk away from our partners in the world. So how did she sort of express herself? Well, she's, as you say, announced the first deployment of British troops. She said 70 of them at any one time will go to Somalia to train government forces there who are involved in a pretty ferocious fight against the Islamist extremist Al-Shabaab. I mean, just this week, Al-Shabaab have killed an army general and several others in a car bomb. They've also said that they will target and kill parliamentarians involved in elections in Somalia. And I think it's wrong, Tom, to say this is the new Iraq or the new Afghanistan, but it's an indication that Theresa May thinks that this group does pose a risk, or could pose a risk, if it is not contained.
It is vital that as an international community, we continue to support countries in the region that are contributing thousands of troops. and that we continue to build the capacity of Somali security forces. That is why the UK is now going to increase further our security support, and we will be calling on others to do the same.
Now, just one further point, Tom. Theresa May right now has got a meeting with the Iranian President, Rouhani, and I think it would be inconceivable she did not raise the case, the high-profile case of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, the British woman who was seized there in the spring and is now facing potentially 5 years in jail. But as I say, that meeting's happening now. We might get some detail on that shortly.
OK, Chris from New York, thank you very much indeed. While we're on the subject of New York, it is starting to look as though the terrorism suspect thought to be behind explosions in the city over the weekend was known to police. His father is reported to have told officers 2 years ago that he thought his son was a terrorist. If true, that raises some awkward questions about America's homeland security, to say the least.
That's him, though. That's the guy they were looking for all over the news.
Did Ahmad Khan Rahami take instructions from others? And was he part of a larger cell? Those questions are now at the heart of the investigation. And today his father revealed he had tipped off officials that his son might be a terrorist.
I called the FBI 2 years ago. And what did you tell them? I told them you got a connection with this guy.
But then, facing further questions about what he knew and to whom he spoke, Mohammed Rahami refused to be more specific.
When you hear now that he's been accused of this, do you believe it? Do you believe it? Sir?
I'm not sure what's going on exactly.
You're not sure?
Yeah, I'm not sure what's happened exactly.
The evidence against his son is compelling, including this new CCTV footage of the 28-year-old Afghan-American wheeling a suitcase through the streets. It's believed it contained one of the devices. A rambling note referencing previous terrorist attacks, including the Boston bombings, was also found at the scene. Both presidential candidates are seeking to exploit this moment. Donald Trump even complaining that the injured suspect is being looked after too well.
He will be given a fully modern and updated hospital room. And he'll probably even have room service, knowing the way our country is.
Hillary Clinton is saying that Trump's incendiary views only help the extremists.
We know that a lot of the rhetoric we've heard from Donald Trump has been seized on by terrorists, in particular ISIS, because they are looking to make this into a war against Islam.
Undoubtedly, the security of Americans and the safety of the homeland has now taken center stage in the campaign, and it will be at the heart of the first presidential debate, which is only 6 days away. Robert Moore, News at 10, Manhattan.
When a 15-year-old Afghan boy was killed last Friday trying to make it to Britain from across the Channel in Calais, it highlighted the risks some children are willing to take to get here. What made his death especially poignant, though, was the fact that he was actually entitled to come to join family members here, but was being delayed by red tape.
He is the youngest known victim of the struggle to get into Britain. Rahim Mullah Oriakil was just 15 and died falling from the top of a lorry as he attempted to stow away. Today, those who take the same risks in Calais every day were digesting the tragedy. Abdul Wali is a member of his family.
Everybody's sad, everybody cannot see the pictures, everybody's crying, it's Bambino, it's too young.
Are they angry?
Of course they're angry with the drivers, with the governments, especially with the British governments. There's lots of children, they're dying for the no reasons. Because if it's like adults, no problem. They can run, they can jump, they can do anything. But the children, they cannot do nothing,
In such poverty and squalor, more than €1,000 has been raised to repatriate his body from those who have so little to give.
I was really, really sad because I felt like he's my little brother. Because he's like, this is not the humanity, that why he's died for trying to get into the UK.
How long did it take you to get here?
Retired GP Dr. Nick Morris helps treat those injured in their attempts to leave the camp, where he says there are now more than 800 unaccompanied children.
But it is a complete disgrace. I mean, here we are, aren't we, in the 21st century. We're standing here, you're interviewing me only 100 miles from London, only 30 miles from Dover, and we have this large population of unaccompanied children. You know, what is happening? What is happening in this world that we're allowing this to go on?
The situation in this camp is getting worse and worse with every passing month, but the death of this 15-year-old has thrown into sharp relief the plight of unaccompanied minors in Calais. Aid workers who've worked in the most testing conditions around the world say conditions here are as bad as they've seen anywhere.
The French government is planning to demolish the camp soon. This new British-funded wall is being built to further protect the road into the port. But for the migrants left on the other side, there seems little hope. Britain remains a dream, close, but a world away from the jungle. Dan Rivers, News at 10, Calais.
Well, tonight, Britain's anti-slavery commissioner has written to the Home Secretary saying bureaucratic delays are forcing unaccompanied children into the hands of smuggling gangs. Kevin Hyland told News at 10 the government must do more to help them.
We see that the traffickers are working in the camps, and if we look at the issue globally, you know, those that are trafficking and putting people in modern slavery are making the most out of vulnerable communities, whether it's in Calais, whether it's in Greece, Italy, or whether it's in Nigeria. And we need to work more as an international community to tackle that.
With a base level of only 8 MPs, there is probably only one way the Lib Dems can go at the next election, at least for their sakes. You'd hope that is true, although these days anything could happen in politics. Anyway, today, in his main speech to the party conference, the party's leader, Tim Farron, made his pitch. At its heart, a promise of a second vote on leaving the European Union. So how will that promise play out in a city where the Lib Dems once held sway?
At Sheffield Hallam University, you can sign up for almost anything. Plate spinning, pole dancing.
It's alive in our hearts.
Even Harry Potter. There is a club for everyone, except that is the Lib Dems. That one fell out of favour, much like the rest of the party. But this is exactly the kind of crowd the Lib Dems think they can sign up once more. Closing their conference in Brighton today, their leader appealed to the faithful, those that is, who want to remain in the EU, as he promised a second referendum on whatever Brexit deal finally comes our way.
If we trusted the people to vote for our departure, then we must trust the people to vote for our destination. So, Theresa May, please tell us what Brexit really means. You have had 3 months. You are the Prime Minister. Stop dithering. What is your plan?
They loved it in the conference hall, but not so much back at the Student Union.
Yeah, I think we should have a second referendum because...
I don't think we should. I think we voted out. We should stick to our guns.
You guys are cheerleaders. Are you going to be cheering for the Lib Dems, do you think, anytime soon?
I don't think so. I think I'll stick with Green for now. Yeah, Labour for me.
Their name is mud to most students.
What about this idea of a second EU referendum, though? Some students might like that, maybe?
The people have spoken, and therefore we have to accept the results of this referendum.
Sheffield is the first place the Lib Dems need to look for a revival because it's the first place they suffered complete collapse, losing control of the council here pretty much as soon as they went into coalition with the Conservatives in Westminster. But political memories can be short, and there are signs of a comeback.
The party surprised itself this month, winning a council seat from Labour with a landslide. They're also sitting firm in Nick Clegg's seat in Sheffield Hallam, where many like the new leader's approach.
Hopefully it's going to get them back in the game because they've just disappeared basically off the face of the earth.
I voted to leave and I feel terrible. I did straight away.
So would you quite like maybe another chance, another referendum?
Yes.
But once the Brexit journey begins, it's not clear we can change route. In cities like this one, the Lib Dems may find their promise is just a diversion and not the next stop on the way back to power. Paul Brown, News at 10, Sheffield.
We'll see. Now, one of the rather touching things about returning Olympic or Paralympic athletes is how surprised they always seem to be by the welcome awaiting their flight home. It was certainly true today at Heathrow Airport. There was a big and excited turnout, as befits all they've achieved.
It was the homecoming of champions, and as Paralympics GB touched down at Heathrow, their first sense of the country's pride came from air traffic control.
Could you pass on our congratulations to all on board? It's been a fantastic show in Rio.
That'll be our pleasure. We're very, very proud to bring them home.
The celebrating began on board, as did the photo calls, and perhaps a little surprise, Dame Sarah Storey received first-class treatment, now the most decorated female Paralympian of all time.
I can't believe I'm sat here in 4F. Been told this is the seat Madonna chooses, so I feel very, very fortunate.
The in-flight entertainment was provided by gold medalist table tennis champion Will Bailey, but it was back to reality for him with a lost luggage claim and reluctant goodbyes to teammates.
Seeing people go home, some people sad, some people overjoyed, you know, it's a strange mix of emotions.
But it's not over yet, you've still got to find your luggage.
Exactly, yeah. That's what I'm worried about.
Thankfully, the silverware made it back okay. Kadina Cox, home to her family with world records in athletics and cycling, becoming Paralympic royalty in record time.
This time 2 years ago I was in hospital, and at that point I couldn't even walk, let alone kind of run and cycle, so to be here with 4 medals around my neck, yeah, it's crazy. I couldn't have dreamt of this moment even if I tried.
But the winners aren't all medalists. Former Marine Commando Joe Townsend fought from the brink of death all the way to the Paralympics.
I didn't know if I was ever going to get off the battlefield alive, and then, yeah, being here 8 years later, competing at the peak of physical health, representing my country once again, fighting for my flag, and yeah, coming home a Paralympian. I mean, it's really surreal, but yeah, a fantastic journey.
And now emotional reunions for our Paralympic heroes who inspire future generations and make the country so proud. Sally Lockwood, News at 10, Heathrow.
And finally, the Indian musician Ravi Shankar will forever be remembered for introducing the sound of the sitar to mainstream Western music and, of course, for his collaboration with George Harrison of the Beatles. But his family also want him to be remembered for the opera he never finished. He was in the middle of writing it at the time he died, so his daughter Anushka has completed it, and as you'll hear, it encapsulates his life's work of melding the music of East and West.
Few in the West had heard anything like it. And soon Western musicians were queuing up to share a stage with him.
So let me introduce on sitar Ravi Shankar.
The Beatles' George Harrison was a huge fan, learning from the maestro himself. So for Shankar, the next stage in his mission to fuse Eastern and Western music would be to write an opera. And today, 4 years after his death, his opera is ready and in rehearsals. A piece of work he was unable to finish before he died, but which his daughter Anushka helped complete.
You know, to me it made me laugh when I started hearing him talk about an opera in those final years, because I thought, really, an opera? But of course it made perfect sense, because that was kind of the next frontier for him, that was something he'd never done, and so he wanted to do it.
It's incredible towards the end of his life that he was taking on something so incredibly challenging.
I mean, I did think, don't you just want to relax just for a little bit, maybe? But that wasn't who he was. He was someone that always needed to be creative and needed to be writing, and this was something he'd wanted to do for a long time.
An award-winning musician in her own right, Anushka frequently accompanied her father on stage, and she and conductor David Murphy were left clear guidelines on how to complete the opera Sukanya, a work he was writing for his wife, even though his health was failing.
I knew he was working on it with David. Even though I would tell him, why don't you rest a little bit? He would say, no, I need to. But he did tell me one thing, that if for some reason I'm not able to finish it, Anushka will do it for me, he said. So he had that confidence that she would do it. I think he would be very happy. I think he knows that his works are in safe hands.
He will not be around to see his completed work performed next year. But the unmistakable sounds of the East, joining vocal styles from the West. The opera, his final work, is classic Ravi Shankar. Nina Nanar, News at 10.
Quite a tribute to your dad. On to tomorrow, and Nina will be back, this time talking to the children's author Michael Mopurgo. He'll be giving us his views on selection in education. Raghu will be here for that. I will be back on Thursday. For now, good night, and thank you very much for watching.